All right. Good morning. Welcome to Coffee with Miss Cook. As always, I am your Dean of College and Gap Year Advising at JCHS. Happy you're starting Monday with me. We'll see if we get some more folks logging in here, but as always, we are recording this and will distribute later in the week. And I'm also going to send out the slides that I'm using as well, because there are a couple of Gap Year links if folks want to follow up on those. As always, I'd ask that you stay on mute for just a little of the content up top, and then we can take questions live in the chat, whatever works for you. And as always, this will be an hour-long recording, so we will honor our hard stop at 9, and we can always continue questions later on. So, what I wanted to just focus on for the first 10 minutes or so here was launching into a little bit of my gap year spiel, whether you're thinking about it for your child or whether you haven't thought about it, just to make sure that we've all got some common knowledge about what a gap year looks like. And I'll say a few words about Israel options specifically, because that does tend to be where the bulk of our students will choose to go, but not everyone. And know that there is more information in the College Advising Handbook, a number of questions to think about as you're choosing a gap year provider, a number of links for popular programs, etc. And the handbook is available on the main College Advising website for JCHS. You don't have to log into that, or in the portal if you're logged in to look at other things for the school. So with that, I'm going to do a quick sharing of my screen. And let's hit slideshow here. Perfect. So just to make sure we're all starting with some common terminology, what is a gap year? A gap year is a natural break for students, the time that would be between high school and actually enrolling in college. And it can be a nice moment where you can step off the kind of hamster wheel of the K through 8 years, where you're sitting at a desk and you're taking tests and all of that, and have a little bit of a break and see what else is out there in the world before you potentially return to that with college enrollment. And usually anywhere between 20 and 30% of the senior class at JCHS will choose to do this. And the number is so broad because, as you can imagine, it's been ebbing and flowing the past few years. With COVID, we had a huge spike. It was like 40% of the class was doing a gap year. And then after October 7th, as we were assessing the safety element, it dropped a bit. Things continue to spike as we watch the situation in the Middle East. But generally, we've got folks that are there now. They're perfectly safe. The GAP programs are obviously aware of security issues and all of that for the folks in Israel, and responsive as world events happen. What might you, or actually, why would you do a gap year? Let's look at that. And this is all sort of backed by research. It is an excellent time to recharge for our students. It's a great time to do some personal growth, perhaps live independently. Some students will choose to do an internship or engage in some way with the workforce at that point. And so to just sort of check on what it is they might actually be interested in doing, which can clarify, the sense of direction and purpose. Whether your student is undecided or sure of what they want to do, a gap year can be a good moment to sort of clarify that. They might be living in an apartment independently, so it can help with some increased maturity and independence during that time. And then depending on where they choose to go, for the folks clearly going to Israel, but we also have folks that might do a language immersion or something in another country where they've got some heritage, that it can really help to just build that connection to identity and whatnot. And they do arrive on college campuses, and I saw this as an admission rep over my 20-year period in that realm. More mature, more independent, more clear on how to get the most out of the college experience, which, as we know, is quite expensive at this point. So they do have sort of an increased chance of success, graduating on time, making the most of all of those opportunities, and then really heading out into their adult life grounded and prepared. So what might you do during this time? Well, there's a whole range of things. Some folks engage in service, as I said, work internships, language immersion, travel. There are programs that, there's some like Kivunim in Israel where sort of Jerusalem's your home base, but you go out to all sorts of different countries where the diaspora has sort of thrived and flourished and really learn broadly internationally about the Jewish community. There might be some academic learning, especially for students with a complex learning profile. Some of these programs can focus on bolstering your executive functioning and whatnot. And then obviously Jewish learning can be an option as well. And know that I talk a lot about programs, but it doesn't have to be a program that has a set, time frame and cost associated with it. We've had students that have just worked here in the Bay Area for a year. Last year we had a student who was heading off to art school, interested in graphic design. And he took a year to work a job, save money for college, and also try and build his own graphic design portfolio and business, which he did pretty successfully, and then head off to art school with a little more purpose and direction. So we can think about this year really broadly. Um, and then I'm going to talk about starting with some Israel options because, as I said, it's literally 90% of our students that choose to do a gap year each year are going to Israel. So these are by far and away the most popular options. So just to give you a sense of sort of what's on the menu there, and I will define each of these more specifically in subsequent slides. But we do have a chunk of students choosing a seminary or yeshiva option just after graduation. Some will go with a mechina, and I know these are sometimes thought of as just preparation for the Army, but we do have a lot of students who engage in this that then come back and go to four-year colleges. More on that in a moment. Masa Israel programs are kind of an umbrella organization for many of the more secular Israel options. But then we do have students that also have engaged in just the Israel year of service and seeking work or volunteering on a kibbutz. There's, a number of different ways to do that. And then sometimes folks just create their own pathways. So know that there's a number of different choices there. To make sure you've got the terminology down. I will, oops, sorry. I think oh my gosh, I just hit our joint application. Let's not do that. Okay, so, oh gosh, why is this not letting me? There we go. Seminary Yeshiva. Sorry about the technical difficulties. So these are single sex options, which are year-long religious studies, and most of them are affiliated with Orthodox, modern Orthodox practices, and their goals are really around personal development, independent living, and then sort of developing religious identity. As it kept trying to send us here, I do have the links for the joint seminary application and the yeshiva application. If students are interested in these, especially the young women thinking about seminary, this is probably the earliest gap application. I believe this year it was due on December 1st. And it is one application. It's kind of like the Common App for a number of seminaries. But for our young women thinking about this option, they do have to be multitasking between their college applications and the seminary application, which doesn't ask for a lot more, but just know that that's something in the timeline. The joint yeshiva app tends to be just a little bit later into the new year, but it is also something that students should be kind of researching options in the fall. In terms of Mahina, this is historically thought of traditionally as a Army prep program, and they are typically Zionist in nature. But we do have a number of our students choosing to engage in them. It's one of the pathways where international students and Israelis can really be together because this is obviously the Israeli option for students to prep for the Army. And some reasons our students would choose to do it if they aren't enrolling in the IDF, and some do because they are enlisting, would be a chance for a real pluralistic environment, engaging with Israeli citizens more closely. And there's some Hebrew language development. And you also do things like wayfaring and whatnot here and there, as it is, briefly some military prep in places. And we've got a number of students already signed on for these for next year. So know that, again, there's one sort of application for a number of different programs if you want to look and see the different kind of themes they have to them. And then MASA is a great umbrella organization for just about everything else that's kind of a program. MASA is a Hebrew word for journey. They have a whole suite of programs they do. They do Birthright and an internship program for folks in their young 20s. But their gap year area, which you can just kind of Google and you can search on any number of different things, tends to have some more secular options or hybrid options. So they do actually have a Mahina or two that's within their purview. They do also have one yeshiva called Torah Tech that's like a little Torah study, and then some internships with high tech companies in Tel Aviv, and then a number of other things. So Aardvark, Young Judea, some of the other things you hear coming to visit JCHS all fall under the Masa umbrella. So you can look at them online as well. And then I'm happy to talk more specifically with families about what you might be thinking about, particularly our JS faculty are also really helpful to help delineate between programs. And know that we've got alums for a huge range of these organizations. So I'm always happy to try and put you in touch with folks for a program you might be looking at. And know that I've got 7 or 8 copies of a book about Israel gap years that someone who serves as kind of an independent counselor to help match folks with Israel gap programs in particular. She published a book a few years ago. She's based in LA. And I have some of those in my office if your child wants to check one out or you want to check one out, that just does a great sort of short overview of a number of these, gives web links and some general advice on spending a gap year in Israel and how to find a program. If you or your student are not interested in Israel, there's a number of other popular options I just reference. As I said, there are a number of students who choose to do language immersion. The Council for International Education, I can't remember what the last E stands for, but CIEE is an excellent source for that in a number of different countries. We have students that choose outdoor adventure immersion, sort of challenge by choice, kind of outdoor things with Knowles, Outward Bound, Pacific Discovery. Those are just a couple of popular ones students have chosen in past years. Service can be great. Rustic Pathways specializes in sort of international options, while AmeriCorps and City Year will do things here in the country. These can sometimes be less expensive gap options because you're doing service in the community. And so it's not so much about getting things from the program, but getting back to it as well. As I said, some folks just choose to do paid work or internships. And then there are programs specifically around executive functioning development or sort of shoring up other academic skills at Dynamy Broad Futures. Gap Year Soar, these are just a handful of these. I will also just give you a couple of considerations as you're trying to think about how to decide on certain gap years. And again, a lot of this is in the College Advising Handbook. I do recommend that all students plan to apply to college still during senior year, both where you have your resources at JCHS and it keeps doors open. So if your student decides at the last minute, you know what, I just want to keep the momentum going, go straight off to college. That's fine. They've got choices. And if they continue to decide on the gap year, then we put in a deferral request and that college will save their spot. But that brings me to, we want to make sure their college list has colleges where you have the ability to defer, which most of the schools JCHS students are looking at do. But I will note the California State Universities are the hardest no on this. So if Cal Poly is the goal, Long Beach, Sonoma State, whatever, that is something they want to apply to during their gap year. Unfortunately, that is the easiest, shortest application to do. But the CSUs do not allow folks to take a gap year. The UCs will allow it if you're going to Israel, because generally they have verbiage on their website about not allowing gap years unless it's religious or military focused. And fortunately for us, they tend to interpret Israel of any program to be religious, and we let them. But that is something to know if you're thinking about Knowles or whatnot. You're probably not going to be able to defer from a UC. So we will talk about this as we're talking about the college list and big goals, but you want to be aware of policies. And then to also speak of policies, if you're earning credit for college classes during your gap year, with With some schools, that's fine. With other ones, that kicks you into being a transfer applicant and you would have to reapply. So that's another place where we're going to need to partner and make sure that we're checking, credit limits and all of that sort of thing. And if they do earn some credit, will the college, can they just set that aside and not automatically take it into consideration? And then I will just note that, affordability can be an issue. Some of these programs are expensive. Funding is available, especially for Israel options, but you do want to see what's out there. The point is to not go further in debt along with college bills. So, also wanting to make sure your student is thinking reasonably about what the opportunities and potential are. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to pause on the gap year conversation for a moment. And I just have a couple of reminders about things that are coming up with college advising before I open the floor up for questions about gap year issues or anything else. So know that your students are having their year-end meetings with me now. I had a handful last week. I think I have two or three more today. I am checking in with them on if they've done any college research, and if not, doing a more hefty nudge that it's time to be really looking into some things. If you did any visits over Pesach break, want to hear about all of that. So just getting a sense of where they're at, checking in on testing, if they've taken some, if they've got some sittings booked when applicable. And then returning to the faculty recommendation letter conversation and trying to make some final decisions about who they're going to ask at JCHS anyway, and then making those requests. And I do ask them to make those requests in person by the last day of classes. We always like to have faculty know what their kind of workload is going to be for these rec letters as they go into the summer. Some folks will do some letters then, especially if they might not have your student again in senior year, just kind of get thoughts out while it's fresh. Others may just start a skeleton letter, and then if they have your student again in the fall, they'll add to it before the deadline. But we do want to get those kind of solidified. If students are going to ask someone outside of the school as well, like a coach or a rabbi, a piano teacher, whatnot, terrific. Those requests don't have to be made right now. But let me know if you've got questions about getting that letter into me by the fall and whatnot. We are also going to begin conversations about the college essay unit in their English classes at the end of the week. So I will make a guest appearance in all of Ms. Foth's classes on Thursday and Friday. We will start planting the seed about this project. For the at-level English class, I think they are going to really start working on it meaningfully in the next few weeks. The AP class is obviously prepping for the test, but we want them to start thinking about possible topics if they've got questions for me. To be asking them. And then during finals week, when that essay is due, Ms. Foth will grade it, but I'm going to also give feedback from obviously the college advising perspective. And I'll just remind you, I think I've said this earlier in the year, but this is an exercise. This is practice. This is starting to flex the muscle of like writing in first person about yourself. And if your student chooses to share what they're writing about with you, which not all will, and that if you want to know, you can check in with me. But if they choose to share it and you're worried about the topic, relax and know that sometimes a student has to kind of get the first thing on their mind out of their system, even though it might not be the right theme or it might not be, as strong of a topic as we want it to be. They'll get that feedback from me or Miss Foth. So let them practice, let them get that out of their system if need be. And then if we want to pivot and change to a new topic, we certainly can. And some folks, nail it right out the gate. And this is the topic that we continue working with and perfecting before submitting in the fall. And then my last thing before I open up for questions, as we get into May, I'm going to send a second and final questionnaire to students to get some updates before I begin working on their counselor letter that will also go with most applications in the fall. So you'll be CC'd on that email when it goes out in early May. Again, it's something that's due by the last day of classes. And I just want to get updates on, what are their summer plans? Have they changed thoughts on a college major? Are they still undecided? Just to kind of check in again a Google form on paper so that I can begin the framework of those letters. And again, much like faculty, I will do sort of a skeleton of some things over the summer and then polish it and finish it off as we're into the fall and we're having more meetings together. So I'm going to stop monologuing now. Wow, that was 20 minutes, not 10. Apologies. And I'm going to look at what's in the chat. And as folks have questions, you're welcome to take yourself off mute. So, the first question, does going to a yeshiva in the US not qualify for the religious exemption for the UCs? Interesting. Only if they go to Israel. I'm actually not sure. I haven't had that situation before, but I can nose around with my contacts at the UC and find out. That would probably cover their religious sort of commentary on it, but I'd want to be sure. And one great person to always check in with at UCs is the rabbi at Halad or at Halad at Hillel or Chabad, because oftentimes when we aren't sure about policies, we'll go to that rabbi and they'll go to admission kind of on our behalf to plead the case. So let me get back to you on that. Do we have other questions, either for the chat or in person? Don't be scared to turn your camera on. I know it's 8:22 in the morning, but I'm always happy to see faces. So, other questions about anything? I know I did a big brain dump. I will say that we've probably got 7 folks in the senior class that are committed to gap years at this point, and a few more that I know are going, but either haven't decided or haven't told me where they're deciding to go. So I do have a map outside my office, both of colleges that students have committed to, and about 60% of the senior class is committed at this point, which is pretty good for April 20th. And I do also have an Israel map up. And then I put little alternate maps in the corner around it if folks are headed to other countries, so that your children and other kids at the school can see where folks are going and starting to think about themselves in those possible places. Thank you. Yes, fantastic brain dump. Hope it's helpful. And as I said at the beginning, I will send this recording out, but also my slides, since I know that they have a couple of links on them to some of the applications and whatnot. And if you're wondering what's in a gap year application, generally they might ask for a piece of writing. Sometimes students just can put their Common App essay in there, and that works. It's the same sort of requirements. They generally want a transcript that either your student is uploading or I send to them. And a lot of times they want an interview. And many will do this on Zoom or the phone, but I have found, especially with the yeshivas, they might fly to JCHS, and I have, folks that meet with kids after school. But the interviews are important across the spectrum of GAP programs because, of course, they're trying to create a cohort. It's often not a tremendous number of students, and they want to know that your child is personable and ethical and friendly, and just that they're going to kind of work in that kind of cohort. So there is this sort of live personality element of it that I think can be useful for everyone. So it's definitely not as intense as the actual college application, but there are a couple of marks that you kind of need to hit. Yes, Ms. Schusterman, you have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren, so much for all this information. I'm just wondering about timeline. You mentioned with the seminary, you are needing to think about that at the same time of applications. I think there's just so much that is going on with the college application. There's no, I'm wondering like what is the right timing in terms of even thinking about these programs, and when should we start like making decisions and applying in relation to applying to the colleges?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's highly individual depending on what you might be thinking about with the gap year. I think it is most intense for our young women thinking about seminary. So I think it wouldn't hurt. And I will have a moment in a few weeks where I'm going to have a couple of seniors talk to the junior class together. And I purposely try and have a couple gap year folks in there to talk to them about what that multitasking looks like. I also know I'm doing the brain dump of all the things, so we're planting the seeds, but I will send the bite-sized chunk reminders to folks throughout the fall because I know this is a lot to hold. That's my job, and I will throw out, some landlines to all of you about like this is what you need to be focusing on this week. But I would say it doesn't hurt to be thinking about the options and potentially identifying a couple of JCHS alums that are doing some of those options, into the late summer and early fall, especially sort of seminary or yeshiva, because you will have to make some decisions about which ones you're applying to once we're into that kind of winter period. For just about anything else, the MASA programs, things in the US, some of these programs are taking applicants up until 2, 3 weeks before they leave, which is like August of after they've graduated. So for most of the GAP programs, this is something that you can turn to once at least that first chunk of early applications are in. November 1st is such a big date for all of us with early action, early decision college applications. After we get past that, we can think more clearly about GAP programs and whatnot. And once we get to November 30th, which is the UC CSU deadline, then most college applications are in. You might have one or two things you're looking at regular decision. By you, I mean your child. But once we're into December, then it's really a time that you can kind of free up your brain to think about, okay, are we doing a GAP program? Who do we want to contact? What are we thinking about, et cetera. I hope that helps. And know that, we'll be doing this in chunks with reminders a little at a time. Question in the chat about will colleges look poorly upon a student for deferring due to a gap year? Really, no. And if anything, I think it's the opposite for most places. I think that, and I know from my experience being on the college side, that students arrive on a college campus after a gap year more mature, more focused, more independent, refreshed. They're not sort of sliding into the baseline, thinking like, oh, I've made it, I got into college. And then understanding that it's another 4 years of school, and they have a lot to do and manage and multitask with. When you have that gap year, it's a moment to just reset things a little bit. So I do think colleges really appreciate how students arrive on campus after that time. I will say, I encourage our students as they're filling out applications in the fall, and I'll say this to them over and over to, and double check things. Some college, they ask if you're considering a gap year on the application. And I suggest that our students hold their cards close to their chest with that, both because nothing's set until you pay the bill and sign the contract to go on the gap year, and teenagers change their minds and plans change. Obviously, with world events right now, we all have to be a little nimble and flexible to see what's going on. But also, I don't want a college, especially if they're doing waitlist offers or defer, that sort of thing. If we're really trying to get your student the yes from the college, let's not give them any reason to say no, as in that student wouldn't physically be sitting in a seat this coming fall, right? So it's perfectly fine to hold your plans to yourself until you've got that admission offer. And then most colleges, as I said, CSUs being kind of an exception to that, are perfectly fine, have a mechanism for you to request a deferral. It's pretty perfunctory to have that granted. And then you've got that year, and they're saving a spot for you. So, but generally, no, I don't think that it's something that is looked on poorly, but we do want to be a little strategic about when we tell them that you're planning to do it, if that makes sense. Other questions? All right. Well, we may be short and sweet this morning, which is fine. I've got junior meetings to get to school for. So we will have one more coffee with Miss Cook next month. And I have yet to book which parents are going to speak to you because I'm waiting to see how everything concludes. But we will have a handful of senior parents that will be available to talk to you about what just happened and how they created their plan, their process, and how it ended up, any advice they might have for you. And know that I work during the summer. I'm typically here, so working remotely, but I am available for all questions. I will have a couple of Zoom meetings available each week unless I'm on vacation, and I will take a little vacation. I'm working on your students' letters, and I'm, doing some predictions on college lists and all of that during June and July. So college advising does not stop with graduation. Do not panic. After coffee with Miss Cook next week, or next month, we will be in conversation up through the time to apply. And it looks like we've got one more question in the chat. Are you talking to kids about their grades and scores relative to how the schools they are looking at? As in, the schools sound great, but you need to up your game. 100%. That is absolutely what I'm doing. And I think grade report 5, if it doesn't come out today, may come out tomorrow, but I know we're about to get an update on grades. Yes, this is the moment where I start to bring the reality check into things, looking at what's happening with their grades, looking at what they might have in score, and seeing if those two things are in any way aligned. But know that the real reality check will come in June once we have their final grades from this year. We have an updated cumulative GPA, which is the GPA they will put on all of their college applications. I will then go through anything they have in score in their following list and their applying list. Some people are aggressively already getting stuff into, I know I'm applying, which is fine. You can wait until the end of the summer to do that too. But I will go into score throughout the months of June and July and put admission predictions on that. And so, some students have an entire list that's all reach schools. And that's when I'm going to send a very pointed email to them in CCU saying, so what we're going to need to do is make this a little bit more reality based, because it would be professional malpractice for me to let you only apply to these schools when this is what's happening with your stats. And it's not personal, it's data. And conversely, sometimes students have mostly likely and possible schools, which is great, but I might nudge them a little to just like, why don't we take one or two moonshots and see what happens? I think you might be underselling yourself a little bit. So that can be the most clarifying moment for students. And I will send a heads up before I start sending those assessments out so you can maybe brace yourself and your child, because it can be a moment where a handful of students really have to become a little bit more grounded on what they're thinking. And I do joke sometimes that I'm the crusher of dreams, but we do want to make sure we're going into the fall like clear-eyed, grounded in data, and making smart decisions. So they do have a range of options next April that they're happy with, right? So yes, thank you. Just trying not to be the bad guy. I am happy to be the bad guy, and they will often take it better from me, or at least differently. So, all right. Anything else? Very good. All right. Well, have a great week, everyone. You know where to find me if you need me. And yeah, good luck to everyone these last few weeks of the school year. Bye-bye.